Yo, welcome to Chapter 8 of Old World Encounters, where in this video we're going to talk about the unification of China. So as always, I encourage you to read the whole outline, but I'll just go over the main points here. So China really begins in this classical period with a person named Confucius. And Confucius was this political and basically philosophical scholar, and he created the school of Confucius. And he was this big educator, and he created sayings that were compiled into a series of books known as the Analects. And with his disciples, they spread these messages all around China in the classical age. So what exactly were Confucian ideas? They were basically fundamentally moral and ethical in character. So they really taught people really sort of how to act in China. And it was to help restore political and social order because, as you may remember, after the Zhou dynasty, there was a lot of mess in China. So key Confucian values, basically it talked about people, they needed to act humane and kind and benevolent toward other people. They needed to be propriety, and they had to show courtesy, respect, and a deference to elders. And they also had to respect filial piety, which was sort of like patriarchy. Basically, the father was the head of the household and everybody should respect him, and a family obligation. And they also had to be personally moral. And if they could do this, they could bring order to China. Now, on the other side of things, there was Taoism. And Taoism basically was the main critic of Confucian activism. They didn't always really like what the Confucians said. So they really preferred philosophical reflection and introspection, and they really wanted to live a life in harmony with nature. So they weren't really about how they acted, they just wanted to connect with nature. So there was this guy, Lao Tzu, and he was the founder of Taoism. And he wrote this book called the Daodejing, which is sort of like Confucian's Analects. And basically it was called the classic of the way and of virtue. And basically he's saying the Tao is the way of nature and the way of the cosmos, and people needed to sort of adhere to it, even though it was an elusive concept and that many people could not see it because it's passive and yielding. And all the behavior and actions of people should yield to this nature of the Tao. And also it advocated small self-sufficient communities, so there were many small farming villages in China at this time. And a third philosophical sort of thinking at this time was legalism. Now, legalism was the doctrine of practical and efficient statecraft. So it was really just like bare bones, just do it. There was no sorts of introspection, trying to think about nature. It was just plain act this way. And basically, it was saying the state's strength was developed in agriculture and military force. So it really discouraged like extra things, sort of to say. So like commerce, education, arts, they're unnecessary for a person just to survive. So basically, it harnesses the self-interest of the people to do what's best for the state. And if you made like minor mistakes, you would have harsh penalties because that would not help the state. And ultimately, though, it wasn't popular among the Chinese, but it was practical, and it helped put an end to the period of warring states that came before this time period. So the unification of China. So we left off from the Zhou dynasty, and after them came the Qin dynasty. So the Qin dynasty was in West China, and it adopted these legalist policies. So it was really strict, but in the Qin dynasty, they were really heavy on agriculture, and as a result, they had a strong economy. Also, they organized a powerful army equipped with iron weapons so they could conquer other people and defend themselves. And so who really started this? It was the first emperor. His name was Qin Shi Huangdi. And basically, he was the first out of all the series of emperors in China as we sort of know them today. Basically, he established centralized imperial rule, so everything was in the capital of China at the time. And through this, he also made a bunch of public projects. So to protect themselves, they made the Great Wall. So this was the first series of the Great Wall of China we see today. But it was also really strict. For example, he burned a lot of scholars alive because they criticized the dynasty. And he also burned all books unless they had utilitarian value. So farming books, they're good. But philosophy books, no, they're trash. So like a lot of Confucian works got burned too, and all sorts of thinking really just got destroyed at this time because it wasn't of use. And also, he did some things like the standardization of laws, currencies, weights, and measures so all people could get on the same page when they were acting. And eventually he died. He went into the tomb of the first emperor, which was, if you've seen the terracotta warriors in China today, that was really just his tomb. So it's a pretty cool place to see. He got this pretty vast, grand tomb because he was really just looked upon by the people as like this great ruler. Also, a fun fact, he died because he thought eating mercury could make him live forever. But as we know today, mercury is poisonous and you'll die. So afterwards, the Qin dynasty collapsed partially because the massive public works such as the Great Wall didn't really float well with the people. And in short, it was a short-lived dynasty, but it left deep marks in Chinese history, and many dynasties that came afterwards tried to act like it. So after the Qin came the Han dynasty. The Han dynasty was founded by someone named Liu Bang, and basically he really just wanted to restore order that had consumed China after the Qin dynasty. And he saw a middle way between the Zhou decentralization of states and the Qin over-centralization. So he tried to find this middle way. After him came Han Wudi, and this was the martial emperor, and this was really the main emperor of China. And he really emphasized centralization and expansion. So he was really all about making China even better than the Qin dynasty. So he adopted legalist policies again, but he also created an enormous bureaucracy. And this is basically a government system where people serve in the government, so sort of like we have today. So he continued public projects like roads and canals and taxes to make sure China didn't go broke, and monopolies to control trade. And most importantly, in his bureaucracy, he used the Confucian educational system. So the people who worked for the government were really well educated. And eventually the Han was able to expand, and they invaded places like Vietnam and Korea. And even the Xiongnu territory steps for, as you may remember, the nomads from Old World encounters. So he really started to expand China into this big empire. At this time, there was lots of economic prosperity, and the social structure was sort of like before. You had the patriarchal social structure, so like women were subservient to men, as like in every empire at this time. And there was one person who wrote an admonitions of women, and this really just sort of helped tell women how they should act around men and their husbands. And children, of course, they had to obey and honor their parents like we still do today. And they really just had a lot of power through the stuff they had. So they had iron metallurgy, that was a big deal. But they also had silk textiles, which were basically exclusive to China at this time. And it eventually spread all over China. And they also had paper production, which really helped replace the bad writing that they had before. Paper could now be stored better too. It replaced silk and bamboo before. And paper was really just this revolutionary thing, as we'll see later in Europe in the 1400s. And finally, of course, there were lots of taxes, but also in the Han Dynasty, they tried to make the wealth less divided. So they tried to encourage people to become more even and equal. And they also didn't really want to invest in manufacturing and trade because, of course, agriculture was the big thing at this time. Eventually, though, the Han Dynasty fell because of the Yellow Turban Uprising. And basically, the land distribution, when the government took it up, they wouldn't distribute land fairly, and they thought the rulers were being corrupt, so there was this uprising, and they overthrew. And after this, China was divided back into regional kingdoms like they had been before the Qin dynasty came into place. So as a review, we may remember the acronym XSZ for the first few dynasties, and then now we can add QH. So this is the order of Chinese dynasties: the Xia dynasty, the Shang dynasty, Zhou dynasty, and in this lesson, we learned about two more, the Qin and the Han dynasty. So very important to remember. Well, this has been Chapter 8, Unification of China. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, there's one more note. Taoism is frequently associated with the yin and yang, so this is a poorly drawn yin and yang. But if you remember, the yin and yang is sort of like a big symbol in China, and now it's all connected to Taoism. So now you know. It's sort of the cosmos, the balance between the black and the white elements. So this has been Chapter 8, Unification of China. Thanks so much for watching, and hope to catch you in the next one.